Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our fourth and final session of our 2023 Global Built Environment Summit. In this session, we'll be exploring the theme of building safety, and we have four great speakers lined up for you today. For those of us that have not met before, my name is Ant Bird, and I'm head of the built environment sector here in BSI, and it's my privilege to be your chair for today. Before I say a little more about this afternoon's agenda, I do need to run through some housekeeping with you all though. So, next slide, please. For those of you that have joined us before, you'll be fully aware that this is a listen-only webinar approach that we utilise, but it is being recorded, and you will get a copy of it and you can share it with colleagues thereafter. That being said, and it only being listen-only, we still welcome your questions and your input. And so please use the Q&A function in the info box that pops up on this platform for you to enter and ask your questions. We really need to hear from you. I'll show you the agenda shortly, but there is plenty of time to have those Q&A sessions, and we'll undertake them at the conclusion of the first session this afternoon and after each individual technical session for the second part of our agenda today. If you do experience any difficulties, then again, using the same function, the chat box, just put a message into our events colleagues at BSI here, and they'll get you back into the webinar straight away. Not a problem. As per normal, upon completion of the feedback survey, BSI will send a link to the recording of the webinar in a few days' time. And as I've said before, this is a CPD recognised webinar. So please request your certificate, and please also do provide your feedback. It's really important that we get your feedback and your thoughts so we can improve and we can better hone the content that we provide to you today. Okay, next slide, please. As you can see from the agenda before you, we have broken down the agenda into two parts. In this first session, we will be taking a closer look at the new overarching building safety regime, and then a focus on what that approach is seeking to ensure when it comes to competency. Following a Q&A session, we'll then take a short break. On return from the break, we'll then take a deeper dive into two specific technical aspects. Firstly, we'll be hearing from the building safety regulator, who will be providing an update on the all-important approved document B that provides statutory guidance on the fire safety aspects of national building regulations in England. And then we'll be hearing about the second generation of structural Eurocodes. Right, that's quite enough of me. Let's now get started. First up, we have Dr. Hal Davis. Hal is the Chief Technical Officer of CIBSE, the Chartered Institution of Building Services Engineers, the professional body for building engineering services. CIBSE delivers authoritative guidance on the design, installation, operation, and maintenance of engineering systems in buildings. In recent years, his work has had a particular focus on building regulations and building safety reform and adoption of digital information management, including the development of British, European, and international standards. And for that, Hal, BSI are hugely grateful. He is a member of the Building Advisory Committee and chaired the Building Regulations Advisory Committee, which was the independent scientific advisory committee to the Department of Levelling Up until the 1st of April this year. He is closely involved in the work of the Construction Industry Council and Construction Leadership Council on building safety reform. Hal, over to you.
Thank you very much, Ant. And good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining us. And this slide shows you what I'm aiming to cover in the next 30 minutes. Now, I must be honest, it's going to be a whistle-stop tour, and there's a lot to cover, but there is a lot of information in the slides that I hope you will find useful when you get them after the event. And if there are any particular things, then please do use the questions to raise them. So I want to cover what's in the Building Safety Act and also the Building Act, which was significantly amended by the Building Safety Act, recent amendments to building regulations, and indeed some of the other new regulations that have come in on the 1st of October. And I do want to flag the significant changes in requirements for competence, which Richard is going to deal with in much more detail in the second session. I do want to be very clear, and I'm going to say this more than once. The Building Safety Reform Programme is about all regulated building work. I believe there is a widespread myth in the industry that because the Act came about as a result of the Grenfell Tower tragedy, it only applies to higher rise buildings. The simple truth is that that couldn't be more wrong. The Building Safety Act covers all regulated building work. And so I hope by the end of today that you'll have an appreciation of that, as well as the additional requirements that are specifically for higher risk buildings. So in summary, what I want to do is to look at the unprecedented changes that are going on in our sector. The Act is the most far-reaching review of building and fire safety legislation, I think, since the Second World War. As I say, it does apply to all building work. It regulates the competence of all those doing building work, and it's all building work. It's not just HRB competence. It regulates the operation and occupation of higher risk buildings, and I'll say a little bit more about what they are later. And it's not the only thing we've got to cope with. We've got all the changes around the Climate Change Act and net zero carbon, and I think we're all aware that there is some degree of uncertainty around that at the moment. So very quickly, why are we here now? Sadly, because of this. And it's really important that we do not forget that this tragedy cost 72 lives. And that is what has triggered the reform programme. And that is why many of us are so committed to making this reform programme effective in improving building safety. We owe it to those who lost their lives and to those who survived them and have to live with the consequences for the rest of their lives. So the first thing that happened was that Dame Judith Hackett was appointed to review building regulations and fire safety. And we've also had the Grenfell Tower inquiry, and that has revealed a great deal about what happened or what didn't happen in the course of the Grenfell Tower refurbishment. And it's important to note that we're waiting for the phase 2 report from that inquiry, which is not going to appear until some point next year, but we don't quite know when. It's absolutely certain that that is going to make further recommendations for change that will need to be built on to the existing reform programme. But we can't anticipate that. And for today, we're going to concentrate on what we do know that we have to do. And I'm going to start with the 4 key issues that Dame Judith identified in her report: the ignorance and misunderstanding of regulations and guidance, the indifference to quality and safety and focus on speed and cost, the race to the bottom, as Dame Judith described it at one point, the lack of clarity on roles and responsibilities, and lack of accountability, an industry that's very good at telling us why it's somebody else's fault or responsibility, and a lack of inadequate regulatory oversight, inadequate enforcement tools, very limited enforcement action and deterrence, and a widespread view that compliance didn't pay, or perhaps, dare I say, non-compliance did pay. I want to pick up on a couple of those things. So what is an approved document? Well, I think we're all familiar with these. And these are the 4 versions, the 4 approved documents that were issued in 2022. Well, they came to force in 2022. They were issued in late 2021. These are all guidance. Now, in the front cover of every one of those, there is a standard piece of text that tells us that approved documents, They're approved by the Secretary of State. They give practical guidance on common building situations about how to meet the requirements of the building regs. So they are for common building situations, and that means they don't apply everywhere. And the critical thing is that everybody realizes that they're giving guidance on how to meet the requirements, but you have to satisfy yourself that the guidance in an approved document is appropriate for your job. And we also need to bear in mind that just because we're doing an energy efficiency project, so we're focused on Part L, we've still got to comply with all the other relevant requirements. And that could include Part F on ventilation, it could include Part B on fire safety. If we're doing anything structural, we need to think about Part A. And I think it's fair to say that under the new regime, there is going to be an awful lot more focus on meeting the functional requirements of the building regulations. It's also fair to say that the building regulations, or in Scotland, building standards, are devolved. And I've put this slide in to give us an indication of what applies in Wales. The wording is slightly different, but the gist of it is the same. Approved documents are guidance for common building situations. And one of the responsibilities that people are going to need to take under the new regime is a responsibility for deciding what guidance it's appropriate to follow. These, on the other hand, are regulations, or in the case of the two on the left, they are the Fire Safety Act and Building Safety Act. And on top of the pile, the Building Regulations, etc. Amendment England regulations, which makes some very, very significant changes to the Building Regulations 2010. And these are changes that everybody working in the industry does need to be aware of. So well done joining us today, and I hope that you will leave this afternoon feeling that you are better informed about these regulations and the broader package. So the building regulations in Schedule 1 contain functional requirements, and we're all, I hope, familiar with these. I've picked 3 from Part B because they are topical, related to fire. So we have the requirement to provide means of warning and escape. That is what the requirement is. It's 7 lines, and that's what every building has to comply with. The guidance may help you get there, but in the new regime, the building control people will be asking, how can you show me that what you are doing will meet that functional requirement? And in the case of external fire spread, which of course was a major issue at Grenfell, this is what the requirement says. And for the record, Sir Martin Morbick found in his Phase 1 report, he found as a matter of law that Grenfell Tower did not meet that functional requirement when it was refurbished. Also worth noting that there is a requirement dealing with internal fire spread, and I'll just highlight that piece at the bottom. There does seem to be an increasing trend using prefabricated pipework in ceiling voids, often running above escape pathways. And I just want to ask the question whether pre-insulated pipework with combustible insulation material, I wonder whether it can meet paragraph 4 of requirement B3. I'll leave that for people to think about. So what about building safety legislation? And I will quickly ask the question, what about Wales? The Building Safety Act applies to England in particular, but parts of it also relate to Wales, particularly where it amends the Building Act, because the Building Act applies to England and Wales. The detailed implementation in Wales is a matter for the Welsh Government, and whilst they have announced what they're going to do about building inspector competence, other things are still awaited. So we have the Act, and I want to ask, where are we now, and give you a little bit of an update on the new system and where it's taking us. And once again, can I stress, this is about all regulated building work that is undertaken in England. So the Act, again, to make the point, It obviously applies to that. That's a residential tower block, and you'll tell that's in London because you can see a rather pointy object on the left. This one is also in London. There used to be some famous gas holders on this site. It's a mixed development. Some of it on the left is 7 stories or more. The building on the right is 6 stories. It's not a higher risk building, but we'll explore that in a minute. But that is typical of what's covered. But it's also worth bearing in mind that these are covered as well. They're building work, and they're all within the scope of the Building Safety Act. And that slide is there for anybody who needs to refresh their memory on what building work is after the session. I want to touch for a minute on higher risk buildings. They are those buildings that are at least 18 metres high or at least 7 stories and are of a description specified in regulations. So the Act includes the height threshold or the story threshold, and the regulations tell you which building types. The reason for that is that the regulations can be amended relatively easily. Primary legislation is more difficult to amend. And so it does create the opportunity for the regulations to be updated if it becomes clear that another building type ought to be brought within the scope of the higher risk building definition. Why is it 18 metres or at least 7 stories? Because there have been a number of instances of buildings that are 7 stories and 17.85 to 17.95 metres high. And of course, they avoid having to follow guidance that relates to buildings over 18 metres high. So government took a decision quite early on to bring in the threshold at 18 metres or 7 stories to prevent that bit of gaming of the system in the future. The building types that are covered, they're listed there, but I'll go on to the next slide, which says a little bit more about them. So buildings with 2 or more residential units that meet the height threshold, that's the higher risk building for its whole life. Design, construction, operation, the lot. Hospitals and buildings containing a care home that meet the height threshold are also a higher risk building in design and construction. They then cease to be a high risk building once they are complete and signed off. And the reason for that is not because there's less of a risk. There's already a regulatory regime for them, and that comes in the form of the workplace regulations and the health and social care regulations. And we don't need an additional regulatory regime for those buildings, so they cease to be an HRB. If somebody needs to do further building work on them, then during the design and construction of that building work, they become an HRB again, and they will be regulated as an HRB, about which more in a few minutes. The new Act creates duties for the accountable person, who's the duty holder for the building in occupation, and that covers identifying, mitigating, and managing risks in the building. And the detail of that regime is all set out in Part 4, which we'll come to in a minute. Before we do, I want to talk about the Building Safety Regulator, and Part 2 of the Act establishes the regulator and gives them various duties. So they are now responsible for the building control system. All building control professionals come under the oversight of the regulator. They also have control of the regime for all building work, not just for HRBs, although for higher risk buildings, they are now the building control body. They have set standards, and they are in the process of establishing a statutory register for all building control professionals. They've published a competence framework for building inspectors and a code of conduct. And it's worth saying that whilst in Wales, the front cover of the competence framework and the code of conduct bears the logo of the Welsh Government and has been published with their authorisation, the fundamentals of the framework and the code are the same in Wales as they are in England. The Building Safety Regulator will oversee enforcement of building regulations. And it's very clear that they intend that there will be enforcement of building regulations, and there are criminal sanctions available to them in the worst cases. I've already said the regulator is now the building control body for HRBs, and they have duties to oversee competence for work on all buildings. And Richard is going to talk more about that. But the overall goal of the regulator is to improve the competence of all in the built environment industry, and especially registered building inspectors. I'll leave the rest of that for Richard's presentation in a bit. So in both England and Wales, building control professionals are required to register, and that means even those who've been practicing for many years will have to go through a competence assessment and register over the next few months. Coming on to the detail of Part 3 of the Act, which is a major revision of the Building Act 1984. And again, these changes apply to all work. They also lead to major amendments to the building regulations, which I'll come to in a few minutes. Again, Building Act applies to England and Wales. The implementation of these changes will be dealt with by the Welsh Government in Wales. Part 3 also creates the so-called gateways, Gateway 2 for design and Gateway 3 for construction of a high-risk building, and these are in addition to Planning Gateway 1. Section 35 of the Act creates powers to regulate the competence of any appointed person. We don't know how that might be used yet, but it's worth knowing that those powers are there, and of course building work as defined in Regulation 3. Part 4 of the Act defines the new regime for higher risk buildings in occupation, and it's the key part for existing HRBs. And this regime includes defining building safety risk, the meaning of higher risk building, the meaning of accountable person, and where there is more than one in a higher risk building, one of them is the principal accountable person, and that is all defined in Part 4 and its associated regulations. The meaning of occupation, and it's worth saying that a higher risk building has to have a building assessment certificate before it can legally be occupied, and occupation without that certificate is a criminal offence. Higher risk buildings have to be registered as well as having those certificates, and they need safety case reports, and they need to keep information about the building, the golden thread that enables the accountable person to manage that building safely in occupation. And there are also requirements for engagement with residents and requests for residents' information. It's worth noting that the Building Safety Regulator published its strategy last week. It's a 3-year strategy until 2026, and it had a statutory duty to consult with its residents panel before publishing that strategy. So residents are a key part of the new regime and have a much stronger voice than they've had before. And Part 4 also includes enforcement duties and compliance and appeals. Part 5, now Part 5 applies across the whole of the UK, even Scotland and Northern Ireland. And it does because it applies to architects' registration, which is regulated across the UK, and architects who are subject to disciplinary orders, that can now be made public by the Architects Registration Board. Again, if anybody's not familiar, to call yourself an architect in this country, you don't have to belong to a particular chartered body. You do have to be registered with the Architects Registration Board. And it's an offence to call yourself an architect if you're not registered with them. There are many others who work in architecture who belong to other professional bodies, but the key test of an architect is whether they're registered with the board. Part 5 also sets up a new Homes Ombudsman. It deals with service charges and leaseholder redress, and I'm not going to dwell on them. But then, importantly, it sets up a new regulator for construction products, which sits within the Office of Product Safety and Standards, and that is looked after by the Department of Business and Trade, but its construction products element is the responsibility of the Department of Levelling Up, Housing and Communities. On construction products, Part 5 gives the Secretary of State new powers to regulate construction products, again, across the whole of the UK, to enforce regulations and amend the current regime to keep it fit for purpose. We anticipate that all products made available on the UK market are going to be regulated, and there are provisions within the Act to introduce a general product safety requirement. Quite hard to argue with that, the idea that anything that's put on the market for use in construction should be safe. I'm not sure I'd want to take the debating challenge of arguing that shouldn't be in place. And we may also have a statutory list of safety critical construction products, but that is yet to be defined. There are new liabilities on materials producers who are found to have produced defective products, and if anybody's in the product world, it is well worthwhile getting to grips with that. And these two sections of the Act and Schedule 11 in particular will be of interest to you. Moving on to the amendments to the building regulations, here's a headline of what they contain. Big overhaul of building regs, a new part dealing with duty holders and competence, which Richard is going to flesh out in much more detail. New regulations covering the building control process. Changes to initial notices and obtaining approvals prior to starting work. And again, starting work on a high-risk building before you've got the design approved by the regulator is a criminal offence. Aspects of the changes apply to all work, not just HRBs, but they have their own regime. And Regulation 38, which deals with provision of fire safety information, has been significantly beefed up. A lot of emphasis during Dame Judith's review on how little Regulation 38 was complied with, and enforcement was non-existent. And I would strongly urge that people recognise that that is going to change. Regulation 38's gone from being about 6 lines to being a page and 6 lines in the regs. And for HRBs, there's the golden thread. Now, I'm not going to go through this in detail because time doesn't permit, but if you are in the process of preparing a design for a building, whether it's an HRB or not, and I'll come to HRBs in more detail in a minute, you do need to be aware that Part 3 of the building regs has changed the procedures for initial notices and plans and certificates. And there is actually no substitute for going and looking at what the regs say if this is something that you are closely involved in. Initial notices are much more restricted, and nowadays the term will be application for approval of full plans. And I think there may be a slide that shows the changes in terminology. So where the building regulations used to talk about local authorities, they now talk about building control authorities or relevant authorities, because for a high risk building, the building safety regulator is the building control authority, not the local authority. Although the local authority, a local authority may be involved, they are not in the lead. I won't dwell on the other terms. I said fire safety information regulation 38 has been beefed up. And again, well worth looking at this, and particularly at the reporting aspects. Whoever has undertaken the work has to provide written information about the fire safety information for the building, and the responsible person who looks after the building, effectively the client, has got to provide a notice acknowledging receipt of that information, and that information is sufficient to enable them to understand, operate and maintain the building. If you don't think your Regulation 38 information is adequate, you have to say so, because you will be pressed for that notice otherwise. And if you give that notice when you don't understand it, you will have no defence later when you can't use the information to manage your building. So that's a significant beefing up of Regulation 38. I would be very surprised if building control don't start to pay a lot more attention to it. Moving quickly into the procedural regs, and again, if you're working on a high-risk building at the moment and you have not yet put it forward to Gateway 2, you do need to look at these regulations in detail. Regulation 1 deals with new HRBs, sorry, Part 1 deals with new HRBs, Part 2 with refurbishment, and Regulation 4 gives great detail on what an application will require. Just a snapshot of what it needs here. So Gateway 2 is prior to construction work on a high-risk building, replaces the current deposited plans or the old deposited plans, and it sets out various things, plans and scale drawings. Where does the building sit in relation to its own plot and to other buildings? And then in more detail, it will require a competence declaration, a construction control plan, how are you actually going to build this, a change control plan, because changes will be made. No plan survives the start of work on site, but those changes have to be recorded. How will they be assessed for compliance? And if they're significant changes, they may have to go back to the regulator. And there has to be a mandatory occurrence reporting plan, because stuff does go wrong. How do you spot it and how do you put it right? And you do have to report it to the regulator in some cases. There are duties to cooperate that people will need to take into account. And I hope everybody can see there's quite a significant package of information that the regulator will want to see for Gateway 2. A key test is, do you think the package you're giving the regulator is enough to give you real confidence that your design, if it is built, will comply with building regs? Because if you aren't convinced by it, don't waste your time giving it to the regulator, would be my advice. Go away and get it to a point where you are convinced, and then go to the regulator. They're going to need to see all of the material that we've just described. They will want to be convinced that you can manage the construction activity so that you build what you describe and that what you build is compliant. And they will confirm the validity of an information. They will mark the homework. They won't do the homework. The days of building control as an advisor are over. They are a regulator, and I think the next slide will show that they will have a different approach. You will need to show them why you think what you're giving them is compliant and what you've used to come to that conclusion. So you may need to show them what guidance you've followed, what standards you've followed. And I've put a link on this slide to an overview of the new regime that the HSE have published. It's got a lot of useful detail in it, and I would thoroughly recommend it to you. Gateway 3 is at completion, where you will need to provide updated versions of a lot of what's already gone before. And the regulator wants to know, have you built what you said you'd build? If you haven't, how is it different? How have you justified that? And if need be, how have you got further approval? And you will also need to provide the golden thread information. And there are prescribed documents set out in the regulations. And again, there's no substitute for going and reading them. And the accountable person will then need to register the building. And these are all documents that are required on completion. I hope you can see there's a certain amount of study material. It's also worth saying for an HRB that the principal contractor and the principal designer will have to sign a compliance declaration when the building is complete. The golden thread, very briefly, because I'm conscious of time, this was a recommendation of Dame Judith, so that's from her report. And very simply, the golden thread is the information that allows you to understand a high-risk building and the steps you need to take to keep the building and the people in it safe. And that's now and in the future. So it gives the right people the right information at the right time. And it is going to change the way that HRBs are designed, built and managed. And there will be a significant job in keeping the golden thread up to date. But that's because the accountable person needs up-to-date information to manage the building safely. The amount of ignorance that was exposed in the aftermath of Grenfell was quite shocking, and the golden thread aims to remedy that. And I think if I can just say, the golden thread is a process and an approach to managing information and delivering an outcome. It's not a software solution. If you get a software vendor telling you that you need their software to meet the golden thread requirements, ask them where they can find that in the regulations, and that'll keep them quiet for a bit, and you can go and do something useful. There will need to be safety cases, and every HRB, and that includes the 14,000 or so existing HRBs, will need a safety case. It will focus on fire and structural stability, and it will be used to prepare a safety case report that the regulator will want to see, and they will then review and assess before deciding whether to provide a building assessment certificate for that HRB. Again, the requirements are in the regs. So very quickly, so what? Well, we do need to respond because business as usual isn't going to cut it. We've got new duty holder roles. This applies to all building work. There is a new structure and responsibility for building control and for oversight of their performance. The building safety regulator will look after HRBs, and all of these regulations have been enforced for a couple of months now. There are specific requirements for HRBs, gateways 2 and 3, and all that we've talked through. And these are things that have to be done. They're not good practice, they're not optional. So that's going to drive a little bit of change as well. And building owners are going to have to get used to the fact that HRBs are being regulated. They will need to have the information to manage their building safely, to demonstrate to the regulator that they're doing that. And there are more stringent enforcement provisions during design and construction, and some of the time limits for action have been removed, and compliance and stop notices have been introduced. Now, there is, and I'm just going to run through these so that you know they're there is additional information at the end of the slides on a number of the relevant sets of regulations. This is all about registering existing HRBs, and there are some other regulations that were laid in August, and all the links are there. There are some articles on the City Journal website. There are various other web pages that are relevant that you can refer to. And with that, I'm going to say thank you for listening. I'm going to apologise to Ant and Richard for taking a couple of minutes longer than I was meant. But I hope that's been helpful. And I think we're going to go to Richard and then take questions. Thank you, Ant.
Thank you, Hal. Excellent as always. Hugely insightful, hugely useful. And just as I say, as I said at the start, people, when you provide your feedback, you will get copies of this recording, and I believe you will get PDF versions of the slides as well. And I think that will be hugely useful and insightful for you to share amongst your colleagues. Right, as I say, and as confirmed by Hal, we'll take Q&A at the end. Next up, we've got Richard Harrell. Great to see you, Richard, and thank you. I know both you and Hal have had a very busy this week, actually, speaking at a couple of events at Excel as well. But Richard, trained as an architect, he is a chartered building engineer and is currently the technical director of the Chartered Association of Building Engineers, a professional membership organisation for construction professionals utilising engineering techniques to design, assess or operate buildings. He has extensive experience in construction and building regulation policy and worked for 10 years within the Building Regs division of DCLG, now Duluc, as a policy lead, and then he was head of technical policy there. He was a technical author of BSI Flex 8670, which he'll tell you about in a moment, which sets out the core criteria for behaviour and technical competence for building safety in the built environment. He has recently been appointed as chair of CPB1, the British Standards Committee on Competence Standards. And again, thank you, Richard, to you and Kate for taking that on. And sits as an independent member of the Building Safety Regulators Industry Competence Committee, the ICC. Richard, over to you.
Thanks very much, Ant. I'm going to talk today about the overall link between fire safety, competence and the Building Safety Act. I want to look at the why as much as the specifics of what's now required, because I think it's critical that everyone understands how impactful the new competence and duty holding regimes could be and should be in addressing a lot of very long-term industry problems. And it's also really important to understand how, for how long a period, the essential competence of the industry has been degrading and declining. So I'm going to look at the underlying problems that contribute to the need for regulatory reform. I'm going to consider the conditions required for industry, including individuals and organisations, to become more competent. And then I'm going to try and explain why the duty holding regime has the capacity to be transformative in our industry in a way that I think should be hugely positive. So when we look at any technically complex process, but in particular when we want to achieve fire safety outcomes, we're reliant on a competent industry that acts responsibly and in a joined up manner. We can have the best standards, the best systems, the best products in the world. If we've got an industry that's not capable of behaving in the right way and joining up with each other, collaborating, then there are risks that those outcomes and the outcomes we want are not going to be achieved. Many of the barriers to industry acting competently lie in long, well understood, well analysed structural flaws that are deeply embedded in industry business models. And what's critical is that I think everyone needs to start to understand that this is not business as usual. Hal's touched on this. We are not simply going to adapt to some a series of tick box new requirements and continue running our businesses and behaving and acting in the way that we have done in the past. Real change is needed, and it starts with modifying the business models that we have within our industry as a whole. The reason for that is that our current business models have led to a dysfunctional system. We've got the wrong behaviours, and those behaviours have tended to drive risk up. This is summed up, one of many quotes from Dame Judith that really flag the nature of the problem that we have. What is initially designed is not what is being built, and quality assurance of materials and people is seriously lacking. The Morale Day report recently published talks a great deal about what further needs to happen in terms of ensuring we have construction products and systems that are reliable, that we understand and are reliable and can be specified properly. I'm going to talk more about the process part, competence for design, competence for construction, and how we actually go about becoming an industry where the competence of our people, the quality of our people, is actually assured in a way that builds confidence and drives the right outcomes. First, though, I'm going to talk a bit about the underlying problems, because if we understand these, we will be able to understand better why the duty holding regime and competence requirements that are within it are so important. So we've been commissioning as a nation reports going back into the 80s, 90s, 2000s, all looking at different aspects or different objectives in terms of the industry's business model. We had Sir Michael Latham's Constructing the Team in 1994, we had Rethinking Construction, the Egan report in 1997, and we had the Farmer Review of UK construction labour models in 2016. Now, when you look at all of those reports, they tend to say very similar things about the problems that the industry has. And on the left of this slide, I've just kind of combined in a very kind of summary manner what those reports actually highlighted. So they highlighted that the industry was underachieving, that it was wasteful, that it has poor quality resulting from industry structure and working practices, that it fails to deliver value for money, that it's ineffective, adversarial and fragmented, that client and industry aims are unaligned, that there's a deep-seated resistance to change, and that all of those factors are likely to be exacerbated by significant reductions in workforce availability in the future. The logos on the right are the symptoms that Mark Farmer identified in his 2016 report. The sector has persistently low productivity. We're not getting better as a sector over time. Other parts of the economy have improved. We have not. We have low predictability. People are not confident they know how much a project is going to cost or how long it's going to take, and that's driven clients to focus on lowest cost as the only way they can actually establish value. We have structural fragmentation. 93% of businesses in the construction industry have 7 or fewer employees. Very hard to communicate, very hard to reach, lots of fragmentation. That's reflected at a leadership level. We don't have strong, clearly identified leaders who can drive change effectively. We have low margins, so very, very low levels of profitability, adversarial pricing models and financial fragility, a dysfunctional training, funding and delivery model. Training investment is low and is actually declining as far as I can see from the latest statistics, which is a great worry. We have difficult workforce demographics in terms of getting the right people to do the jobs. We have a lack of collaboration and improvement culture. We do not learn from the lessons. Historically, we have not learned from the lessons of the mistakes we've made. A lack of research and development and investment in innovation, and all of this combines to create a very poor image for the industry as a whole. When you look at the recommendations from those 3 reports, again, this is a very kind of crude combination of those, but they kind of repeat and reinforce the same themes. They say we need committed leadership. They say we need a focus on the customer. So that's the end user. Why are we not focusing on how the end user's experience relates to the product we produce? We need integrated process and teams, a quality-driven agenda, commitment to people. That's about training, development, support, proper supervision and oversight. Client leadership as best practice procurers. We need to procure in a better way, better briefing, use of coordinated project information, clearly identified design responsibilities, standardized non-adversarial contracts, registers of competent consultants, contractors being rated on quality as well as cost, tenders evaluated on quality, a shift to collaboration and partnering, and the increased use of modern methods of construction. So, and these are kind of repeated. We've known that these are the right things for industry to do. So what has industry done? Historically, prior to 2017, what actually happened in the industry where these recommendations came forward? Well, the industry kind of cherry-picked. The industry cherry-picked the recommendations that would make it more cost competitive, and I'll talk about why that was in a minute. But it also went through a series of other changes between the kind of 1980s and the late 2017, 2018 period. All of which were driven by the need to reduce time or reduce cost. So in design terms, we had a move away from standardized scale fees to more fierce competition on price. So lower fees mean less time spent thinking about things, less time coordinating, managing risk. So we had fierce fee competition. We had consultants reducing their scope of services and passing design and other tasks down the supply chain, more subcontractor design. In terms of technology, we had a rapid expansion from the 1980s onwards of a multiplicity of different construction products and systems compared to a more predictable standard set of construction systems prior to that. National standards bodies was privatized. Our building research establishment was privatized. We moved to a more globalized supply and manufacturing chain. In terms of contracting, we had a huge increase in the use of design and build contracting as clients tried to offset risk onto a single point. Much deeper and more fragmented subcontractor supply chains, which were better able to absorb risk. Technical skills became progressively downgraded. As margins got thinner, the time to invest in people and the money to invest in people reduced. and we lost independent site inspections through clerks' works. And there are a series of other contextual factors. They're on the slide. I know they're not easy to read, but and I'm not going to go through them all. But essentially, when you look at these in a relatively crude bit of analysis, it's all about reducing time and reducing cost. If you layer on top of that the 2008 recession, and if you look at this diagram on the right-hand side, shows the fluctuation in construction industry output over time. And the industry we have, the construction sector, is kind of designed to deal with this kind of quite rapidly fluctuating demand and output. After 2008, that kind of model of being able to kind of capture profit and reinvest it kind of disappeared. We had a very flat industry with sustained lower margins. And again, that massively increased price competition and sharpened appetites, arguably to dangerous levels. The net result is kind of visible if you think about the impacts of all these changes through the time, cost, quality triangle. So I think most people are familiar with the concept of the time, cost, quality triangle. It's a basic way of explaining the trade-offs that are made in establishing project priorities. You can get things at a lower price if you're willing to maybe take a bit longer and have a slightly lower quality building, or you might have things at a higher price if you are willing to pay to get better quality and take a bit longer as well. If you want to do things very quickly, then the cost may also increase, etc., etc. So these are kind of seen as inherent trade-offs in projects. Because clients focused primarily on cost, because of all the difficulties with the industry I've explained, quality suffers. And because clients' second priority is time, very often, based on business planning needs, not realistic programs for the delivery of quality buildings, quality suffers again. And of course, time is actually just cost. Time is commoditized and valued within contracts as a cost to someone. So really, we've looked at an industry where quality has been traded down against cost over a very long period. And in this instance, quality also includes meeting the necessary standards of performance for safety, as well as other aspects of compliance with regulatory requirements. So we have an industry optimized to deliver lowest cost, and that has had absolutely catastrophic consequences. Again, Dame Judith Hackett summed this up extremely well. These problems have helped create a cultural issue across the sector, which can be described as a race to the bottom. There is insufficient focus on delivering the best quality building possible in order to ensure that residents are safe and feel safe. The response to the failures resulting from this long-term process of degrading quality is the Building Safety Act. It's been said before, it's the most significant piece of legislation to go through Parliament since the Second World War, and it has huge implications. The Act seeks to achieve certain very specific aims. This is my interpretation of what the Act is intending to do, but I think it's pretty accurate. So it looks to transform the level of oversight and the quality of regulation of construction work. It looks to increase the frequency and severity of enforcement and prosecution. It looks to ensure the accountability of key individuals and businesses. It requires stringent higher standards for higher risk buildings. It ensures buildings are managed in occupation so that residents feel safe and are safe. It looks to improve industry competence and revalidate the standing of building control inspectors to support change in our culture of regulation. And it looks to ensure individuals and organisations are competent and act competently. Now, as Hal has pointed out, and it is worth reiterating again, most of the measures apply to all building work. There are additional requirements and regimes for higher risk buildings, but a lot of the measures and the duty holding regime in particular applies to all building work. So if it's affected by the building regulations, it's probably covered by the duty holding regime. Now, the Act does this in a number of ways. It does it through the establishment of the new building safety regulator. strengthened powers for inspection and enforcement, the new regime for higher risk buildings, and legislative regime for higher risk buildings and occupation, through registration of building inspectors and significantly increased oversight of the performance of building control bodies, and through the new duty holding regime for all building work, which sets out competence requirements for both individuals and organisations. I've highlighted two elements here: the new regulator, because that is going to change the dynamic of our sector in a way that we have not experienced before, and the new duty holding regime, and that's what I'm going to focus on for the rest of this talk. So the HSE, who are the building safety regulator, are going to work in a different way from the oversight regimes that existed largely through central government over previous decades. They see enforcement as a normal and vital part of everyday functions. They absolutely expect industry to take responsibility for its own actions. They are not going to hold industry's hand and provide comfort that things are okay. Industry is going to be forced to take absolute accountability for the work that it does. They'll employ joined up intelligence led enforcement actions to ensure that they target people who are consistently trying to evade or avoid working to the spirit of the law as well as the letter of the law. They're going to provide a lot more information about what they do and don't like, and it's up to us to take that on board. And they have extensive investigatory powers to enter promises, demand information, take information, seize assets, undertake testing, open up works, etc., etc. They're going to exercise much tighter control of building control, and they're going to audit and change the culture of building control by providing a different steer. We've already seen this actually starting to happen, where the BSR expects building control bodies to act more as a regulator and less as part of the design team or as a consultant. They take the view that building control bodies have been too supportive of industry, and that's allowed industry to become increasingly ignorant and less competent in terms of actually being able to deliver compliance. And they're going to basically take on the role of being the regulator in high risk buildings. Critically, we're also going to see the introduction of risk into the equation for everybody. But the duty holding regime that they're going to oversee, and these are building regulations, they are all building regulations in the same way that Regulation 38 is a building regulation, and the other parts of legislation, the statutory legislation, this is law, actually have huge implications for everyone working in the sector. Again, have to stress, these requirements apply to all building work, not just high risk buildings, although there are additional requirements for high risk buildings. So there's a general duty to for all of the duty holders, which I'll talk about in a moment. They have to cooperate and share information. They have to plan, manage and monitor work to ensure compliance with relevant building regulations. They have to ensure they and the people they appoint are competent, and they have to ensure they only undertake work within the limits of their competence. This applies to both individuals and organisations, and for individuals, competence is about having the right skills, knowledge, experience and behaviours, and behaviour is now written into the law. You've got to have the right approach and be able to demonstrate that you took a responsible approach and attitude, you have a responsible attitude towards delivering your legal requirements. And for organisations, it's about having the organisational capability to plan, manage, monitor and review work so that it complies. The duty holders themselves, there's a new duty holder. These are all based on the CDM duty holding requirements, but it's a separate regime. So there will now be two sets of duty holders, one for Construction Design and Management Regulations 2015 and one for compliance with the Building Act 1984 as amended. It's the latter that we're talking about here. For higher risk buildings, there's a new duty holder called the accountable person or the principal accountable person, who is responsible for the safety of the building in occupation. But for all building work, we have the client who is responsible for the building work itself, so commissioning the building work. And their duties include planning, managing and monitoring a project including the allocation of sufficient time and resource to deliver compliance with the building regulations. So that time, cost, quality triangle, all of those elements now have to be able to be developed, and decisions on time and cost, resource, those all have to be thought about in the context of complying with building regulations and ensuring there's enough time and resource to actually do that. And I think that's a huge, huge change, and that is written into the regulations. They have to appoint a principal designer and a principal contractor and ensure that they're competent. They have to provide building information to every designer and contractor on the project, and they have to cooperate and share information. We've got a principal designer who coordinates the design stage of the work. And again, similar duties: plan, manage and monitor the design work during the design phase, coordinate matters to ensure that if the building is built as designed, it will comply with the relevant building regulations, ensure that they and all designers working on the project cooperate, communicate and coordinate with others, liaise with the principal contractor and assist the client in providing information. The designers who work on this must not start work unless satisfied that the client is aware of their duties, must ensure that if built, the building work would comply with relevant requirements of the building regulations, take all reasonable steps to provide sufficient information about the design, construction and maintenance of the building to assist others. They must consider other designers' work which directly relates to their building work and report any concerns to the principal designer. And the principal contractor and contractor have similar duties to not start building work unless satisfied the client is aware of their duties. Is the contractor's duties to provide each worker under their control with appropriate supervision, instruction and information to ensure that building work can comply with the relevant requirements, and refuse to undertake work they believe is non-compliant. The principal contractor is in charge of the construction phase of the work and has a duty to plan, manage and monitor all of the building work and coordinate matters to ensure that they comply with the regulations. They have legal duties to cooperate, communicate and coordinate their work, liaise with the principal designer and assist the client in providing information to others. So these are pretty onerous but very explicit requirements. Now, the whole system is designed so that these roles are basically kind of self-reinforcing. The client has to check the competence of the principal designer and principal contractor, and they pretty much have to keep a record of how they've done that. They've got to be able to show the building control body how they've done that. The principal designer and principal contractor have a key role in checking and measuring the ensuring the competence of any designers and contractors that are appointed. And the designers and contractors are legally required to check that the client knows that they've got these duties before they actually start work. So they check each other. And I just wanted to kind of reinforce some of these other features here. A general requirement not to undertake work if you know it's non-compliance. It's just very, of course no one should be doing that, but it's absolutely explicit now that you should step away if you believe work you're being asked to do is non-compliant. That's the same for designers and contractors. But also this duty to report concerns about the work of others. So designers and contractors should report to the principal designer, principal contractor and or client if they believe the work of others is non-compliant with relevant requirements. And duty holder expectations are going to start including risk. The duty holders are expected to, again, this is set out in guidance published by the HSE, should expect duty holders to proactively demonstrate how their project will comply with building regulations. This should include an explanation of how their project meets functional requirements from design to occupation, and should include identified risks and their management arrangements, evidence on which guidance informed design and construction, evidence on how duty holders have assessed the appropriateness of the guidance used to demonstrate elements of compliance. This is a big change. We have a compliance framework in the building regulations that has been historically based on the performance and compliance of the building work itself. Now we're going to have to start thinking more clearly about risks and how they are managed as well. So what does this all mean in practice? The construction industry is not going to be able to evade responsibility. No one can realistically state that the expectations placed on them to comply with the regulations and all of the procedural steps that go with that, it's not going to be possible to argue that anyone within that kind of ecosystem has unclear responsibilities. People won't be able to hide behind legal structures and the companies they work for either. There are increased enforcement and sanction powers for the building safety regulator to track back, even if a company has gone out of business, to track back to sister or parent companies or groups and to prosecute those companies. And if those companies are found to be guilty, then the individuals working for them are also can be prosecuted subsequently. We're going to have an intelligence-led regulator with an appetite to enforce and prosecute. Much extended timescales for prosecution and enforcement, so the likelihood of being held to account if something goes wrong is much higher, and the only way to get on the right side of that is to do the building work and design work properly. A significant onus on industry to manage and demonstrate competence and organisational capability, and big changes in terms of what industry can expect from the building control professions. They will no longer be giving design advice. They will be advising on compliance and performance, but they won't be actually suggesting the solutions to problems that design teams and contracting teams have created themselves, very often through not being sufficiently aware or competent in terms of regulatory compliance. In terms of industry how industry has to prepare for this, to my mind, there are 5 kind of major building blocks here. We as an industry, and it is our responsibility to do this, have to put in place the right competence frameworks and standards tailored to people's roles, tailored to the expectations in the sector, tailored to the level of competence that's required, so that we can actually measure people. We then need to have effective systems of assessment so that we can actually identify what people are competent to do. There's a misassumption that maybe everyone in the industry has to be completely requalified and retrained. It's not entirely true. I mean, we do need to do more training. We do need to ensure people are more highly qualified. But the first step is to actually check whether they're competent to be doing the job they do today. That's about assessment of their current capability, and then making sure that we understand the implications of that in terms of the work we ask them to do. So second part is effective systems of assessment. Third part is ongoing competence management and revalidation systems. This is standard practice in many other sectors. It's about supporting people with training and CPD on an annual basis, undertaking self-assessments and reviewing people's competence on an annual basis, and putting in place training plans. It's not rocket science. It's something the industry is poor at. We need to get much better. We then need management systems to allocate tasks, and this is absolutely critical. We need to make sure that we are only allocating people with the right skills and abilities to do specific types of work, and that they feel confident if they are being asked to exceed the limits of their competence to say no. So we need management systems that respond accurately to match the right people to the right jobs. And then we need third-party oversight to ensure that when we've got these policies and procedures in place, that we're actually following them diligently and keeping us on our toes. For actual businesses or people in the industry, everyone needs to look at how they're going to implement that good practice competence management. It's not rocket science. It is very doable. People have to get their head around the component parts of it and engage with that and start moving. The HSE as an organisation is very clear that if your intent is aligned with the law and you are making an effort to move along that kind of development pathway, then they'll work with businesses and individuals if problems occur. If you're trying to evade it, then the outcomes will be very different. Everyone needs to review their processes, records, and how information is recorded and stored, shared, and how long it's retained critically. Time periods for retention are much longer. People need to focus on developing collaborative and more coordinated approaches to their work. You've got to actually think about how do you demonstrate your legal commitment to communicate, collaborate, coordinate, and share information. And everyone is going to need to reinvest in technical understanding and technical competence. These skills have degraded. Many of us know what to do, but we don't know why. And so when the context changes or a more complex decision arises, we don't have the technical understanding that we need to deliver against it. A lot of work has already been going on. There's lots more to do, but the competence steering group, which was set up back in, I think, 2018 in response to Dame Judith's report, has developed a whole series of new frameworks and started to develop thinking on competence across a range of sectors, from engineers, installers, through to fire safety officers, building standards professionals, designers, site supervisors, project managers, etc., etc. That group is now it's transferring into something known as the Industry Competence Steering Group, which will be a standing committee, subcommittee of the Industry Competence Committee in the Building Safety Regulator. So that work will have continuity in the longer term. BSI have established committee CPB1, which is the Committee for Competence in the Built Environment, a committee I chair. Initially, that committee oversaw the development of Flex 8670, which is a benchmarking standard to challenge existing competent frameworks to say, do you have the right behaviours, do you have the right competencies to ensure building safety outcomes? And it also oversaw the development of PAS 8671, 8672 and 8673, which provide guidance on competence requirements for principal designers, principal contractors, and for building safety management. Further standards are coming forward through the committee at the moment for fire risk assessors, for construction product competence, and for organisational capability. And these are all industry-led initiatives. It's really, really important that we have the confidence to say, right, we can grip this, let's get the standards we need, and then we can deploy them to ensure we're meeting our obligations to society and delivering the outcomes we want. And there's further work that's gone on in relation to supporting quality management for construction firms. So this is kind of, a proxy for ensuring that organisational capability is developed and maintained. The BS 99001 is a version of the 9001 series quality management systems, but particularly tailored for the construction industry and for businesses of varying different sizes. HSE has published guidance on collaboration and contracts and procurement, and there are a number of collaborative procurement methods available. And the HSE is now in the process of formally regulating the building control professions. This is a template for the way that other functions or professions may need to think about ensuring and managing the competence of their sectors over time. They are pioneers in terms of functional regulation, and that registration requirement kicks in force on April the 6th, 2024. The organisation I work for has absolutely engaged with this agenda. We've developed our own building inspector competence assessment scheme that's approved by the Building Safety Regulator, and there's no reason why other professional bodies and organisations cannot also look to develop their own approaches and get them third-party assured and use those in a way that provides robust evidence. I would certainly encourage people to do so. And we've also been heavily involved with the Engineering Council in producing a registration scheme for engineers working on higher risk buildings. Again, industry-led initiatives responding to the need for robust competence management systems. Now, to draw all this to a conclusion, I'm going to go back to where I started, looking at the problems that the industry has. So on the left, we've got that list of kind of key characteristics that haven't modified or changed over time: underachieving, wasteful, poor quality, failure to deliver value for money, etc., etc. And on the right, we've got the characteristics of the duty holding regime. So it's about planning better, managing better, monitoring better, reviewing, coordinating, cooperating, collaborating, sharing information, ensuring competence, ensuring compliance, highlighting concerns, ensuring there's adequate time and resource, working within limits of competence, and requiring declarations of competence at key stages that people are confident they've met those duties. And all of those kind of requirements are written into the building regulations. They are law. They're not just statutory guidance even, they are law. So if we look at how these map onto each other, if we look at the characteristics of the industry and we look at what the duty holding regime can and should do, we can start to see that it's actually going to force or create the conditions for industry to address many of these long-standing structural problems. If we plan, manage, monitor and review our work better, we're going to actually achieve better results. We're going to be less wasteful, we're going to have better quality, we're going to be delivering better value for money, we're going to be more effective. If we collaborate and share, we're going to actually be less adversarial and fragmented. We're going to start to see client aims and industry aims align for the first time. So I'm going to leave it there. I'm absolutely convinced of the transformational nature of the competence requirements and the duty holding regime. This is a huge opportunity that I think everyone should really grip in a positive way, because it will make not just our working lives better and the industry better, but it will actually deliver better for everyone else as well. Thank you very much.
Brilliant. As always, Richard, thank you. So insightful and so suitably detailed. Hal, welcome back, sir. Thank you. We have overrun slightly, not a problem though, but we'll take about 10 minutes of questions if that's agreeable, and then we'll take a short break. And we've got quite a few questions in. So I've got to ask this first one. It came in previously, and I have a wry smile on my face for asking it, but it needs to be reinforced. Can our speakers please reconfirm that the Building Safety Act applies to all types of buildings and building work and not just HRBs? Richard,
yeah.
Hal?
I'll go first very quickly. If the building regulations apply, then virtually all of the measures set out in part 2 of the bill, part 3 of the bill, sorry, also apply. So the vast majority of the big changes to the Building Act apply to all building work.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
Brilliant. Thank you. And just to say, this does get asked time and time again, so hence the importance of people sharing this recording and these slides thereafter. We need to make sure we have that message out there. So thank you. You both touched upon this in your respective sessions. Next question. The building safety regulator, and indeed Dame Judith, has always been quite clear that the industry needs to step up and play its part, including where additional guidance may be needed. Do they really mean it? And how will we know what good looks like when it comes to following third-party guidance? Who would like to take that first? Hal?
Yes, I think they do mean it. Dame Judith's view is that if people are competent, then they ought to have a reasonably good idea what they're meant to be doing, and that industry shouldn't be constantly waiting for government to tell them. The comment she sometimes uses, as a chemical engineer, she didn't expect a civil servant to tell her what grade of stainless steel to use in a pipe in a chemical plant. I think it makes the point quite well. How do we know what good looks like? Well, Richard and I work for professional bodies. This is being run by the British Standards Institution. The clue is in the name. There are a number of industry bodies that have got a good track record of producing guidance, and we will continue to do that, and I think that's what people need to look for. And those who've got the knowledge, please come and join in so that it's a consensus process. Richard, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is so that I think when we're looking at industry producing things, there are certain rules of thumb, whether that's done within BSI or externally by professional bodies or others. It's got to be transparent. So you've got to be open that you're developing a standard. You've got to be inclusive. You've got to allow people from across the sector to contribute and be involved and comment. You've got to go out and get people's views on what you're proposing. It needs to be consensus based, and it needs to be reviewed periodically and updated in light of experience. But we do know how to do this, and the HSE has been very clear that where industry develops standards that are delivered by subject matter expertise in an open and transparent way, and where there's industry consensus that they represent a sensible level of quality or requirements, the HSE will respect those standards in terms of the expectations they set for industry as well. So we are entirely capable of doing this. I'm really heartened to see how many initiatives are coming forward from within the industry to actually fill many of the gaps that exist at the moment.
Thank you both. Question coming from Colin, who's online with us right now. Again, touched upon, but if you could expand, what are the timescales and transitional arrangements for the Act and the various regulations?
There are a whole series. What I would say is there are, I think, 5 sets of transitional regulations that set out when the different elements of the Act come into force. Hal, is that right? I think, and I think you need to go and read them. I'm afraid it's not a very simple answer to provide.
It's not, and actually it prompts me to say something that applies under the guidance piece. Before people go looking for guidance, please go and read the regs. There's a lot of detail. What do people need to provide at Gateway 2? There's 2 pages in Regulation 4 of the High Risk Buildings Procedures Regs. In terms of transitionals for HRBs, if it's a project that had made a substantial start before the 1st of October, then you need to go and read the detailed transitionals, because there are several relevant scenarios. You need to work out which one you're in and therefore which of several regs applies. And you also need to be clear that the status of your building control professional on the 1st of April next year is fundamental to whether you continue under the old regime or whether you have to go under the building safety regulator as of the 1st of April. So read the regs as a first instance. There is a helpline at the regulator. They are likely to ask you as first question, have you read the relevant regulations, and encourage you to go and do that before they talk further. But the devil with some of the transitionals is in the detail.
That's great. Thank you both. Thank you both of you. Just time for one more question. Again, this is one that's been submitted online. We have now seen Paul Morell's independent review of construction products, and we await government's next steps. What would our presenters today like to see when it comes to ensuring that products used in our buildings are fit for purpose? Richard, could we start with you?
Yeah, well, we have a new regulator in the Office for Product Safety Standards overseeing this regime, and to my mind, a regulator that tests and enforces where tests prove products to be non-performative in terms of their declarations of performance is vital. We need there to be proper policing and appropriate penalties in place that really incentivize manufacturers and system suppliers to ensure that what they're claiming their products do and the way that those products perform are absolutely aligned. I do also think that we need a much higher level of understanding within specification and design communities as to how to utilize the information that's delivered through testing regimes and declarations of performance and systems information. So there's work at both ends to make sure that what's chosen is the right solution, the right product, and that the choice that's made is informed.
That's great. Thank you. Anything you'd wish to add, Hal?
Very briefly, as several manufacturers said to Paul Morell himself, please, can we have proper enforcement of the regulations we've already got, so that cheating doesn't pay? And my plea to government is, can we please have a clear statement of the direction of travel, and could you then follow it through and stick to it and not change it again in 6 months' time? I appreciate that there may be a change of government, but we do need some clarity around this. Big investment decisions may hang on some of this stuff.
Absolutely, they certainly do.
I just say there is a limited amount of resource and capacity to test and evaluate, and we need it to be focused on the areas where it's going to deliver benefits. So that clarity and certainty is absolutely vital.
Yeah, no, we do need it and we await it. That's a perfect place to finish. Thank you both so much. As I say, brilliant as always, and that you got through an awful lot there. I know people attending today will be truly appreciative of what they've heard with you and information that will follow on. So thank you both. I now suggest we take a 5-minute break. Can we come back at just after 3:30, when we'll move into our second session, which will take a much deeper look at some technical aspects in terms of fire safety and structural design. So 5-minute break. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, welcome back. Hopefully people have managed to grab a cup of tea or coffee and they can come back and join us. We're now going to move into taking this deeper dive into some technical aspects of building and infrastructure design. And first up today, we have Charles Allais, who is joining us this afternoon to talk about Approved Document B. Charles is Head of Technical Policy on Safety and Access Standards in the Building Safety Regulator, where he leads a team of policy and technical professionals through the development of several approved documents. He is an experienced fire engineer who practiced both in the private and public sector before starting work as our regulator. In his various roles, he has participated in the development of several major national policy projects and technical standards. Thank you so much for making the time to join us today, Charles. I know how busy you are, but over to you.
Thank you very much, Anton. It's a pleasure to be here to talk a little bit, to talk some more. Let's make sure. Ooh, let me try to get to grips with the slides. So it's a pleasure to be here to talk some more about the work that we are doing at the moment, specifically focusing on Approved Document B. So when I was putting my slides together, I thought the best place to start with my slides would be where some of the other presenters were kind of leaving in terms of the Building Safety Act. And I was listening to some of the Q&A just before and asking, well, what the three main functions of the Building Safety Act and the Building Safety Regulator are. And I'm certainly here to try to reinforce the message of the two previous presenters that one of the key duties on the Building Safety Regulator is about overseeing the safety and standards of all buildings. So that's quite an important part. And Richard talked very well about the duty about promoting competence and establishing a regulating building control profession, and I'm sure everyone is also aware of what's happening with regards to higher risk building. So in terms of what I will be talking about today, I'll be mostly talking about a small element about how do we make sure that we oversee the safety and standards of all buildings. One of the way is through the approved document, and this is certainly something that we are looking at. One of the things that has been happening as the Building Safety Regulator has been stood up is there's been a transfer of responsibility for the approved document from the Department, from Lovely Housing and Communities, to the Health and Safety Executive and the Building Safety Regulator, where one of the duty, as I said, is of the BSI is also to try to manage the approved document alongside some of the other things that we are doing in my team, which is about managing competent person schemes, as well as provide wider technical independent advice to ministers on some building regulations and built environment matter. This is for all approved documents, although my talk today is going to be focusing mostly on Approved Document B. This is for all approved document. As everyone, I'm hoping quite a lot of you knows, there are currently 17 approved documents on quite a range of topics, which are essentially divided between safety, health, and building services standards. Quite a wide range of topics covered through the approved document. So there's quite a lot of work happening in this space on each of these approved document, and as part of establishing ourselves in the Building Safety Regulator, there's certainly a lot of thought and a lot of work in trying to figure out how do we do this better. One of the things I should say is we also have there's one more approved document which went out for consultation over the summer that we are currently working on. So there's soon to be one more. The relationship between the Building Safety Regulator and the department, when it touches on approved document, is an existing one, but is still a relatively new relationship, and there's certainly one that we are all looking forward to seeing evolve, because there's a lot of potential to have really productive relationships between ourselves and the department on these types of issue. Okay. When I was putting this this presentation, I think one of the key things which I always try to which always strikes me, and I always strive to try to remind people, is, well, what's the purpose of the approved documents, and why do we have approved documents? So I think, again, the previous presenters have been keen to tell people, well, go and look at the Building Safety Act. One of the things I would say is go and look at the Building Act 1984. There's a lot of really interesting things, and more specifically, if you're interested in the approved documents, certainly section 6 and 7 of the Building Act 1984 are quite fundamental to some of our work. Section 6 is really trying to define what the purpose of the approved document is. Well, it defines why they're called an approved document as well. For anyone who was interested in these, this is because these are approved by the Secretary of State, and it also defined clearly that the purpose is to provide practical guidance with respect to the requirements and provisions of the building regulations. So that really sets up really clear a really clear purpose for the approved document, and aim for us to strive for when we're developing these documents. Section 7, equally important and equally interesting. I think it also defines what we call the negative liability concept, which is more of a legal concept, but again, quite fundamental in trying to understand how the approved document work within the system, and how the compliance with the approved documents can be used as a proof of compliance with the building regulation as standing negative liability. Again, the main thing from me on these two slides is do go and read these two sections of the Building Act. If you've got any questions as to what the purpose and how to use the guidance in the approved document, they're really fundamental and really should be well understood by everyone in the industry. Oh, there you go. One of the questions which comes often is section 6 really highlights that the purpose of the approved document is to provide practical guidance for common building situation. And this is a question which often comes back to us, which is, well, what is a common building situation? So it's not an easy question to answer, and there's certainly a lot of discussions about what is common and what is uncommon. One of our best attempts at trying to define what is common and what is uncommon and providing some guidance is actually provided in the manual to the building regulations that we published quite a few years ago now, which is about trying to identify what non-standard condition are for these types of buildings, and there's a little bit of an explainer in the document as to what we mean there. So again, really interesting document, a really important document for people to be aware of when it comes to use of the approved document. The manual also provides some guidance on the users of the approved documents, which is always quite interesting. And again, for anyone seeking some better understanding as to what the approved document and what the purpose of the approved document and how they should be using the approved document should definitely read and consider. There's certainly an expectation of sufficient skills and knowledge to understand the guidance and applying. It is quite a fundamental concept highlighting in the manual to the building regulation. One of the final things I should say about the manual to the building regulations, I've said it's a really important document. One of the things I should say is that because of some of the provisions of the Building Safety Act, amending the building regulation to 2010, we do know that it does need a little bit of updating, and will certainly need some updating after April 2024. And this is certainly something that we have on our to-do list, because it does need a little bit of an update, and it is part of our plan of work to try to update this document relatively quickly in the coming year. Approved document. I'm hoping that this is things that most people here will know and understand, which is, you know, what is approved document. So approved document provides guidance on fire safety requirements of the building regulations, and defines the functional requirements as well as the guidance associated with it. It is split into 2 volumes, dwellings and and buildings other than dwellings, to try to follow a similar format to the other approved documents. So this is some of the ongoing work that we have in terms of making sure that we have a style guide, and we follow a style guide whenever we develop new approved document. The guidance in approved document B is under quite a lot of scrutiny for various very good and obvious reasons that everyone, I'm sure, will know and will be interested in, and I'll be talking a little bit more about what it is that we're doing to review approved document B. The slide seems to be slightly cropped there, but one of the things, I mean, again, people will be fully aware that a lot of work has been happening on approved document B over the last few years, and whenever I try to put these types of presentations together, I always try to spend a little bit of time and remind myself of the journey we've been on. This is not to say that there's not a lot more work to be done, but it's always to remind us. It's always good to remind ourselves to the amount of work which has been happening on amending the guidance in approved document B. So things like changes with regards to assessment in lieu of test, the ban of combustible materials were quite significant changes to the guidance and actually the entire framework in the building regulation. One of the other pieces of work which certainly was very substantial and took us quite a lot of effort was the clarification of approved document B to follow the new style guide, to transform it from the 2-column format to the single column format, trying to simplify the sentence structure in the approved document. It's quite a substantial piece of work where we had to work really deeply to try to make sure that we were clarifying the guidance as much as we possibly can and wherever it was possible. As always, there's always more to be done, and I'm not saying that the document is fully clarified and there's not more to be done. There's always more to be done with regards to clarification, and this is certainly something that we're always striving for. Another thing which is quite fundamental, and again, I will be talking about this a little bit more in the later stages of my, it's in the next slide actually, of my presentation, is the technical review of approved document B. Again, really significant piece of work for us, and there's a lot of work going on that, and I'll be touching on this. Some of the other changes that we've done in approved document B are in relation to sprinklers and the provisions of sprinklers in residential buildings from 11 meters, so lowering the height threshold from 30 down to 11 meters in residential buildings. Again, significant amount of work went into this and making sure that it was well incorporated and understood by industry throughout back in 2019 and implemented in 2020 and 2022. EAS was another one. EAS and wayfindings for firefighters were also can be seen as relatively small, but still make quite a big difference in the different provisions of buildings, and certainly should not necessarily be overlooked in comparison to everything else which was done to approved document B. And the last thing which is being cut off from the slide here is the current consultation that we have. The current consultation that we have out at the moment with regards to staircase in residential building, national classification and sprinklers. And again, I'll be touching on to that a little bit later in my presentation. So the technical review, as I've mentioned, really big piece of work for us, which was started and announced in 2018, which was I mean, one of the first steps that we took to start the technical review was launch a call for evidence, asking people in the sector what areas of research were necessary, and then where should we actually try to spend our time to try to do some more research and make sure that we were building the necessary evidence. We identified several research projects. Some of them, quite a lot of them, are still ongoing. Some of them are coming to the end of the research projects, and again, I'll be touching on to that a little bit later in my presentation. but essentially what we have currently on is 9 or 10 research projects which have been commissioned and have provided us with some further evidence and certainly provided us with a lot of food for thoughts when it comes to reviewing approved document B. One of the things which came out of the technical review was certainly the consultation which was published late last year in December 2022 with regards to the provision of a second staircase in residential building. I'm sure a lot of people on this call will be aware of this presentation, which was launched just before Christmas last year, where an initial proposal was made to introduce a new trigger height of 30 meters for residential buildings where a second staircase, where provisions would be made in approved document B for a second staircase. This led to quite a strong response from the different actors in the sector, which inherently led to the Secretary of State taking stock of the Secretary of State for the Department for Levelling Up Housing and Communities, taking stock and provided an update in the summer of 2023 that he intended to lower the height trigger for the second staircase from 30 meters down to 18 meters. So that was a significant. It was a significant announcement. Again, it is available online, and people might want to refer to it. The final thing which was announced with regards to second staircase was with regards to the transitional arrangements. Certainly there was something, well, there was a written ministerial statement which was published in October 2023 about the transitional arrangement, making it clear that the changes in approved document B with regards to a new trigger would be seen, is not necessarily as a response of a threat, but is seen as an evolution of design standards, which was quite an important moment for the department in terms of second staircase, this particular issue. I think a lot of people will be aware that all of the announcement, all of the work which has been going on second staircase has certainly created a little bit of some challenges in the sector, with some reports of scheme being cancelled and delayed due to the uncertainty and confusion which are happening with regards to second staircase. Again, the announcement in October was quite another one which I would recommend people go and have a read of, because it does try to explain how this is not necessarily responding directly to a threat, but really much trying to see this as an evolution of safety standards. So in terms of the work that we're doing on second staircase, this is, as I said, because of the challenges which are being reported in the industry at the moment, which we are acutely aware. We are doing quite a lot of work at the moment on this policy and working very closely with the department. Quite a lot of the work we are doing is trying to do some engagement with the sector in terms of understanding the different position of the different actors in the sector as to what currently people are provided. And there's certainly quite a lot for us to do in terms of engagement, and we'll continue to do that with different stakeholders, as well as the Building Advisory Committee, which is quite central to the bit of work. Some of the other things that we've been doing in terms of the work at the moment is certainly be focusing our attentions on, well, what are the different configuration and what the different technical requirements for a second staircase might be, to integrate that in the approved document. As I'm sure people on the call will understand, there are a lot of technical questions which we are trying to kind of work through. Evacuation lift is certainly one which has been coming up following the consultation, and that we are considering, especially for unmanaged residential buildings. And the final point I've got on this slide is about the speeds. Again, I cannot re-emphasize this enough. I'll answer a question which I think I'm likely to be asked, which is about, you know, how soon are we likely to see anything with regards to second staircase. I think the only thing I can really say for now is that we are really working at pace on this, and trying to go as fast as we possibly can, take into consideration all of the evidence that is available. So there's a lot of work happening on this at the moment. And there's a lot to be done still. So that's for work on staircase. I mean, there's a lot of focus on the work on staircase at the moment. It's certainly something that is at the forefront of everyone's mind. However, there are 2 or 3 further areas which were talked about in the consultation, where we are still progressing our work. I think it's fair to say that because of the challenges presented on the second staircase issue, we've been focusing more on this issue. However, we haven't forgotten about the 2 other proposals which were in the consultation, and there's certainly a bit of work going on in terms of progressing these areas and the changes, making sure that we understand the responses to the consultation, with some strong concerns highlighted by different sectors in the industry about, for example, the national classification and the impact this could have on the sector. So again, there's a lot of work on our side on sprinklers in care homes and the incorporation of the national classification. Another element which doesn't necessarily get talked about a lot, another thing that was in that consultation was a call for evidence about paragraph 10.6 and 10.7 of the approved documents. So we've collected quite a lot of feedback on these 2 paragraphs in volume 1 and the corresponding paragraph in volume 2. Again, this is certainly something for us which we are going to focus quite a lot of our attention on, and certainly will represent a substantial piece of work going into the future. I think as I'm nearing the end of my presentation, I'm kind of put back this slide in just because I think the key message on changes to the approved document is that the key message I really wanted to kind of have here is, yes, there is a lot of focus on second staircase, and there's some justified questions as to what the technical requirements should be for a second staircase, and equally there's a large amount of work happening on this space. But I think it's quite important for everyone to remind ourselves that there is also the rest of the technical requirements, and some of the research projects, as I've highlighted, are coming to a conclusion, and there's certainly a lot of there's a lot of ambition on our part and expectation that some of in the not so distant future, some of these research projects or some of the research findings will be incorporated into the approved documents. So really what we want to see is making sure that the standard and the approved document continue to evolve, supported by the evidence base which is provided through some of the research projects which are highlighted here, and any other ones which might be necessary. It's really one of the key things of the transition from our team, is making sure that we invest in the necessary research to improve the approved document, especially approved document B wherever possible. And I think I haven't caught up on time. I think that's me.
Perfect timing. I mean to the minute, Charles. So thank you. Listen, I'm going to be completely honest with you. It's been really helpful to understand where you are as our regulator, and just to know what's going on. And there is so much going on. But I know full well, I bear the scars. Okay, how hard it is for a regulator to come along when they don't have, well, when they're developing important provisions, but perhaps things aren't quite finalised yet with ministers, etc. But just to come along and offer that update has been really useful. So thank you, Charles. I really mean that. You won't be surprised, we do have some questions, as we often do when we have regulators join us. The first one is, just to be clear, this is from John, who's joined us, just to be clear, does the Department for Levelling Up still oversee the building regulations themselves, and the BSR oversees the development of the approved documents? Is that now how it works?
So very good questions, and very good question here. Yes, I think again there's a lot to be worked out, because separating the two is not necessarily as easy as some people tend to think, but certainly the model that we are working on at the moment is that kind of shared ownership between the approved document and the building regulations. But again, I think to try to alleviate some of the concerns that having two teams working on similar kind of things, there's a lot of very close working with the departments in terms of technical provisions and making sure that both the policy and the technical goes hand in hand in the long run, because that's really what we want to strive for.
Brilliant, thank you. Another one, this is a pre-submitted question in terms of, you've sort of covered it, but I'll help you along. When might we expect to see the revision of ADB? Now, you said that, and I'm mindful and respectful that you have due process to go through, and we have a few ministers of the Crown involved as well. Would you be able to suggest that you'd like to see it around the mid-year, or might we see it in the second half of the year? If you can't say, don't say, and I completely understand.
I think it's a question that we get often asked, and this is a question which is really difficult for me to answer, to be completely honest, because some of this is slightly, being completely honest here, I think some of this is slightly outside of our hands and depends on many factors which can't necessarily directly be controlled. What I can say for certain, and I've been trying to give my best assurances on any of these every time this question is coming up, is that there is certainly a drive both from ourselves as well as the department of trying to resolve this as quickly as we possibly can. That's really the main drive from both ourselves and the department. Is we understand that it is creating challenges in the industry at the moment, and we understand that it creates blockers for multitudes of different reasons, and this is something which needs to be resolved. As to what exactly the timeline for publication is, as I say, some of it is outside of my hand, but I can give my best assurances for what is work that we're working on it a lot and as fast as we possibly can make it.
Yeah, no, thank you for the candor. I completely understand, and for somebody that sits on the back Part B working party, I can see just how hard officials are working, and yeah, absolutely keep doing what you're doing, so that's great. A further question from an attendee today. You suggested that you might test some of these latest updates before final publication of the approved document, whenever that might be. How might you do that, and can people offer to assist?
So what we've been doing is doing quite a lot of engagement with different big stakeholders in the sector, and this is certainly something that we want to try to do a little bit more of. There is certainly a big belief on our side that we need to make sure that everyone understands what the different technical requirements are and where we're heading. If people want to have got some ideas or want to send some things, there are official correspondence channel that they would. I'd certainly encourage people to try to use if they have some particular layouts and particular questions that they would like to submit or plans. I think we naturally going through some of the kind of representative bodies of the different organization and kind of main actors in the sector, but we do want to make sure that everyone understands what it is that we're working on. So if you've got what you think is a particularly good point, first, I hope that you've made that point in the consultation, because we have read all of the consultation responses, but if you have something that you particularly want to submit, please do go through some of the official correspondence channel.
Charles, maybe we'll have a chat after. I know you have to dart away quite quickly, but if we can maybe, if there's an email address or similar that we can provide that you'd rather have people be pointed to, we'll see if we can incorporate in what we send out after this event. Question that's just come in as well, in terms of research reports, and you touched upon many that you're undertaking. Where do you actually publish these research reports, and do you publish interim findings?
So very good question. Our intention at the moment is to make sure that all of the research is being published. All of the research which is being undertaken is being published and is publicly available. We have not been publishing interim reports. We have what we call, in terms of governance, technical steering group, and again we've got some oversight through the building advisory committee working group as well, which is provided, where we have some discussions about the quality and the information which is provided in some of these interim reports. What has happened is a few of the researchers and a bit of the research that we have commissioned has basically inspired some of the researchers on the project to actually publish papers. So some of the people who keep an eye out, there's certainly a number of papers which have appeared in the public domain about some of the research which was commissioned. I'm not going to mention anyone in particular, but there's certainly some papers, some academic papers, which have been published back on the back of some of the research that we've undertaken. And this is certainly something that we try to encourage the people that we are working with or who are undertaking the research on our behalf to try to do, just to make sure that, you know, we don't confine ourselves to the reports and the research that we have done ourselves. So hopefully that answers the question.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, and it is so important. I mean, you know, it's quite a while since I left the department, but you know, there's been a dearth of funding availability to undertake this important research, and for you to have that now and to be undertaking it and for it to continue, so a bit of a plea there, is hugely invaluable and much needed as we go forward to develop the approved documents, all approved documents. I'm mindful of the time, so just one last question. I'm also mindful that you're about to be followed by Dr. Steve Denton talking about Generation 2 Eurocodes. And it was me that was involved in putting Gen 1 Eurocodes into the approved document B. Just wanted to understand your interaction and understanding of where Gen 2 Eurocodes are and what Generation 2 Eurocodes will mean to you as a regulator in the coming years. Any thoughts there?
Is a very good question, and is another kind of side of my portfolio, if I can describe it this way. Certainly another side of another bit of work that my team and me are doing at the moment. We've been liaising with Steve and the relevant British Standards committees on the development of both the Gen 2 Eurocodes as well as the national annexes. We're certainly looking over the next few years and making sure that we are part of the journey in integrating some of these standards and have it on the horizon that some of this might mean changes to the relevant approved document A in this matter mostly. So this is going to be a huge, again, different side, but this is going to be a very big piece of work for us over the next 4 or 5 years coming. Because some of the changes on these Gen 2 Eurocodes are quite substantial, and we do need to make sure that we both understand it and support them wherever appropriate, so that they're properly incorporated into our guidance when necessary. So huge and very important piece of work, slightly different to approved document B, different types of people involved, but certainly something that we will be working on over the coming years.
That's brilliant, thank you. I'll probably pick up a similar question when I get to ask a few questions of Steve in a moment. In the meantime, Charles, thank you so much. I do fully appreciate how busy you all are, you and your team. So thank you for joining us, and look forward to working with you in 2024. Take care. Bye for now.
Thank you very much. Bye.
Right. Bye now. Right. We're now joined by Dr. Steve Denton. I'm sure many of you will be aware, Steve is WSP's Head of Civil Engineering in the UK, leading a unit of over 600 staff. Steve's expertise and experience spans many facets of engineering, strategic consultancy, and research and construction. He is an internationally recognised expert in bridge engineering, and he is a global leader in the development and implementation of design standards. You're going to hear about it in a moment. Steve is the chairman of CEN TC250, the international committee with overall responsibility for the structural Eurocodes, and BSI continue to be very, very appreciative. So thank you, Steve. In this role, he is leading the development of the second generation of the Eurocodes, which is the largest international standardization program ever of its type. He is also visiting professor at the University of Bath, a trustee of Clifton Suspension Bridge Trust, and a non-exec director of Syria. He's a fellow of the Royal Academy of Engineering, fellow of the Institution of Civils and the Institution of Civil Structural Engineers, and he was elected, well done, Vice President of the Royal Academy of Engineering early this year. Steve, I truly don't know how you fit it all in, but we are so glad you do. Over to you, sir.
Thank you very much for that very kind introduction, and particularly your kind words around my involvement in TC250. And I should say actually that BSI's contribution to the work on the evolution of the Eurocodes has been very, very considerable in holding the secretariat for TC250, and really the contribution and the approach has been exemplary. So I'm immensely grateful, because frankly it would have been impossible to do what I've done if I hadn't had the support from Tracy Wilkins and others at PSI. So hopefully I'm going to be able to advance these slides. Yes, I think I will. So so this is my agenda for this afternoon. So I want to start off with a short background to Eurocodes evolution. And then talk about the objectives and the approach to the evolution of the Eurocodes, and then really bring people up to date with to explain what the current status is at a European level, and then talk a little bit about the emerging picture around UK implementation. And then I'm going to wrap up by giving a little bit of an overview of some of the key changes. I mean, clearly in a presentation like this, given the scope and breadth of the Eurocodes, it's not possible to talk through all of the changes that are happening, but I just want to give a little bit of a flavour of some of the key changes, and perhaps most importantly, to provide to people some places to go for more information if people are interested. So let me get into the background to the Eurocode evolution, and I think it's probably helpful just to kick off with a little bit of my background. Andy very kindly gave that introduction, so people will have heard some of this before, but I think the important point here when I took over the role as chairman of TC250, that was back in 2013, so I've been doing it for just over a decade. But I bring multiple perspectives to that role. I mean, my fundamental day job is the head of civil engineering at WSP, but I do combine that with strong links with academia and education. I've been advisor to clients and governments for many years. And so I do try and combine all of those different perspectives in the work that we've been doing on the Eurocodes. But I think first and foremost, I'm a practitioner, and it's through that practitioner's lens that I've tried to focus my efforts with the evolution of the Eurocodes. So let me just give a little bit of an overview, because I'll be aware that there'll be some participants this afternoon who will know quite a lot of the detail around the Eurocodes, others may be a little bit less familiar. So the Eurocodes EN 1990 through to EN 1999 are the design standards for civil engineering and building works used across Europe and used in many other countries around the world. When they were first introduced, the European Commission did an impact assessment, and they determined back in the sort of early mid-2000s that these standards would be used by around 500,000 engineers. So the impact of these standards is really significant. And as we move to the development of the second generation of these Eurocodes, we're maintaining much the same structure that we have at the moment. But for those who are familiar with the Eurocodes and looking at the image on the left-hand side of the screen, we've actually introduced 3 new documents on structural glass, on fiber polymer composites, and on tension membrane structures. That will be in the second generation documents, but otherwise the structure remains broadly the same, but I'll talk through later some of the details around some of the changes. And I mentioned the role as TC250, so TC250 is the CEN committee with overall responsibility for the Eurocodes. And the way that we organize ourselves is that we have subcommittees that take primary responsibility for each of the different Eurocodes. So the current Eurocodes, 10 standards and 59 parts. We're moving to the second generation of the Eurocodes, 11 standards, around 64 parts, accompanied by 12 SEN technical specifications and 7 SEN technical reports. Now, it's really important to understand that the Eurocodes design standards sit within the broader family of European standards for construction. So the Eurocodes operate in conjunction with European product standards and European execution standards of construction specifications. And that's a very, very important interdependence because clearly when we're undertaking design or we're developing design rules, then those will be reliant upon certain criteria being satisfied for products and also be reliant upon certain, for example, tolerances being achieved during construction. So one of the things that we've been working very hard on with the second generation Eurocodes is to really make sure that that alignment, that full alignment is in place between the Eurocodes, companion product standards and execution standards. And again, I'll return and talk about that a little bit later. One of the other really important features of the Eurocodes is that they are accompanied by national annexes, and the Eurocodes have special rules around what our national annexes are able to do. And those are a little different from national annexes for other documents. And fundamentally, they're there to enable countries to retain their national authority on matters of safety, and also to deal with some of the fundamental geographic variations that we have, for example, in climatic actions. So each Eurocode has its national annex, developed by a national standards body. But then there's always been complementary information that has been provided, and then the implementation of standards has always been supported by client requirements and general other support to the profession. Now, again, for those of you who are very familiar with the way in which the current suite of Eurocodes operate, one of the things that this diagram indicates is, again, one of the changes with the second generation standards, where in the first generation standards, the provision of complementary information was restricted. What we said was that national annexes could include references to complementary information. But the intent was that that complementary information itself wouldn't be included within the national annexes. In reality, the way this played out was in quite a lot of countries, complementary information was included within national annexes. And when we came to write the rules around national annexes for the second generation documents, it seemed sensible just to relax that requirement that we notionally had for the first generation, and to say that complementary information could be included within national annexes. And hopefully that's going to enhance the ease of use of the suite, because there will be fewer documents to reference. And again, just to kind of conclude this bit of background, this figure gives you a sense of the overall timeline for the Eurocodes. So the first generation of the Eurocodes, the EN Eurocodes, were published between 2002 and 2007, and widely adopted in the UK and across Europe from 2010. The EN Eurocodes, though it's referred to them as the first generation EN Eurocodes, were preceded by the ENV voluntary standards and other documents ahead of that, actually. But essentially, the first generation EN Eurocodes were those published in 2002, 2007, widely implemented from 2010. And then the work on the second generation Eurocodes, there were foundational activities that happened between 2010 and 2013. But then really the work in anger started around 2015, and it will conclude at a European level in 2025. So it will be a very significant decade-long effort to develop the second generation Eurocodes at a European level. So that's a little bit of background. Now let me talk around the objectives and the approach to the Eurocode evolution. As Anta had explained, this is a huge program. It's been an opportunity to bring some innovations and to formalize some of our approaches to standards development on this scale. And I've been very gratified by the very positive feedback and the support we've had, and the kind words that have been said around the whole approach we've taken, really being an exemplar, a model for how standardization programs at this scale should be undertaken. And hopefully there will be some points that can come out of the way we've approached the Eurocode's evolution, which will be helpful for future standardization programs, major complex interdependent standardization programs. I think one of the really important things about the way we tackled the challenge was to start off with a very clear pair of overarching aims, overarching objectives for the evolution of the structural Eurocodes. And the first is that we should achieve enhanced ease of use. And the second, that we should achieve exemplary levels of international consensus. And I'm going to dig into these a little bit more now. So in terms of enhanced ease of use, there was a lot of discussion at the start of that process of planning for the evolution of the Eurocodes, the production of the second generation Eurocodes. And at the time, we talked quite a lot around simplification, the need for simplification. But you'll understand that the word simplification can take different meanings, and that it is certainly prone to an interpretation around like the dumbing down of content. And the reality is that some of the issues, some of the topics that we are covering within the Eurocodes are inevitably quite complex. And actually, there's quite a significant price if we do not include some of that complexity in terms of the efficiency with which designs can be undertaken, the manner in which new technologies and approaches can be used, and those are prices, particularly when we're conscious around not just the cost but carbon impacts of our projects. They're a big price to pay. So we moved away from that language around simplification, but recognized that even if things are complicated, that doesn't mean that we can't focus really hard on ease of use issues. So these have been a major focus. And one of the things that I did when I took over the role as chair, one of the first things I did was I established an international panel, 16 members, who then undertook wider consultation to develop a position paper to define TC250's understanding and approach to enhancing the ease of use of the Eurocodes. And through that work, a position paper was established, unanimously endorsed by the 34 CEN members, that included this vision for the second generation of the Eurocodes that focuses on this point of creating a more user-orientated suite of design standards that are recognized as the most trusted and preferred in the world. But we also went quite a lot further in terms of the practicalities and the approach, the philosophy that we should adopt in terms of enhancing ease of use of the standards. And we've built this around 5 pillars. The first pillar, statements of intent to meet users' needs. Second pillar around principles and priorities. And then 3 pillars really around supporting and management of our approach, the provision of examples, having some strategic performance measures, and then also, as I said, putting in place the management governance and support for this effort. And if I dig into those a little bit further as well, because I think some of this has proved, essential actually to the work that we've undertaken, and I'm, very, very pleased and proud of the fact that we did this at the start of the program. And one of the first things we did was to recognize that if we were going to have thousands of experts from across Europe working collaboratively to develop second generation Eurocodes, we needed to make sure that everyone had a similar target audience in mind, primary target audience in mind when they were drafting. So we recognize that there are multiple audiences for the Eurocodes, but we should be focused on a single primary target audience. And we agreed that that target audience should be practitioners, defined as competent engineers with the definition that's on the screen, competent civil, structural, and geotechnical engineers, typically qualified professionals. And I really think this wording is helpful, able to work independently in relevant fields. I'm sure many of us have seen it in staff as they develop within our organizations, that there's kind of a point in your career, probably in the UK, around the time of achieving chartership, a time when we're confident to give people, greater independent roles on projects. And we can kind of probably picture that individual maybe 4 or 5 years into that career. That's the kind of person that we're thinking of as being the primary target audience. But as I said, we recognize that there were multiple audiences. And so not only did we define the primary target audience, but we also set out a series of statements of intent for all of our audiences. So for that primary target audience, we set out this statement of intent that we will aim to produce standards that are suitable and clear for all common design cases without demanding disproportionate levels of effort to apply them. But you can see that there were statements of intent made for other user groups, so for expert specialists, to make sure that we're providing freedom for experts to apply their specialist knowledge and expertise, and not to restrict innovation. Or for regulators, to endeavour to produce standards that can be referenced or quoted in national regulations. And when we're developing standards to be adopted across 34 countries in Europe, and that are actually adopted in many other countries around the world, which have very different regulatory structures, you can imagine that that's a non-trivial endeavour. And so what we've used these statements of intent for is that they've helped us to navigate some of the decision making that we've had to make over the last decade or so. And it's sort of interesting reflecting back on this, because at the time we were producing this, I guess for understandable reasons, there were some within the TC250 family who were saying, well, if we put this out, if we make this public, if we talk about these statements of intent, isn't there a risk that we're setting a high bar for ourselves, and and we may be criticised if we don't entirely fulfil these statements of intent? My view, and I think the view that's held sway and has worked for us, is to say, of course there's a risk in that respect, but we will do better if we're clear in our intent. And therefore it's very worthwhile to make sure that everyone engaged in this huge project understands what we are trying to achieve, and we've got some common and consistent language that expresses the way in which we intend to do that. And then similarly, pillar 2 around principles and priorities, 2 families, general principles and specific principles, and you can see right at the top of the list that focus on improving clarity and understandability. Second, around improving ease of navigation, and of course, if you read down through these principles, priorities, sometimes you find situations where there is a little bit of tension. Sometimes these principles, different principles can pull in opposite directions, and that's not always been easy to reconcile. But what we have is a common framework, common model that everyone engaged in the project can use as a basis for having those discussions, and sometimes trying to find that right balanced position, that consensus position that everybody is comfortable with. And then, as I mentioned, those other pillars, there are a number of innovations that we brought into the program. We appointed a technical reviewer to look across all of the work that we're doing, because, again, as people will understand, in standardization activities, drafting standards is a very, very highly skilled, very highly skilled exercise. Of all the things I do, and I get to work on all sorts of different projects and some, wonderful world-class projects, I think the work I do on standards development is one of the most cognitively challenging things that I do. We know that just writing a single clause is difficult. Writing a section of a standard is more difficult. Writing a part of a standard is more difficult still. Writing an overall standard is harder. Writing an interdependent, huge suite of standards is harder still. And what makes it difficult is trying to make sure that you have alignment and consistency. So having a technical reviewer that looks across the complete suite has been really important. And the activities of a technical reviewer, not just being to review what is produced, but also to provide a wealth of guidance and documents and examples. We operate a really important policy guidelines and procedures document that sets out examples. The drafting guidelines and rules that we have from SEN and BSI are extremely useful, but they do leave room to tackle things in different ways. And what we've done is to augment them with a lot of detail on how we want certain things done, so that from a user's perspective, then they'll see a much greater consistency of approach, particularly how certain things are expressed within all of the Eurocodes, and an improvement from what was achieved with the first generation of the Eurocodes. So that covers what we've been trying to do in terms of enhanced ease of use. In terms of exemplary levels of international consensus, there's a very important statement in the SEN internal regulations that says this: the chairman shall do everything possible to obtain a unanimous decision of the technical committee. But if unanimity on a subject is not obtainable, the chairman shall try to seek consensus rather than rely simply on a majority decision. And I know when I first read this many years ago, I kind of looked at it superficially, and I said, well, if you reach consensus, isn't that unanimity? What does this really mean? And I suppose over the last decade or so, I've I've understood increasingly and learned a lot around the importance of this statement and what it really means, because of course what we're talking about with consensus is getting to a position where all parties don't necessarily achieve their number one preference, but we arrive at a consensus position that everybody can stand behind. And what's important about that is that reaching consensus needs to be recognized not so much as an outcome, but as a journey to an outcome. And the steps that need to be taken to achieve that become really important, and they link to the overall philosophy, the transparency, the behaviors of the experts involved. And so we actually took time as TC250 to think around this and document it and set out the philosophy that we wanted to take. And I guess this is not necessarily a standard activity within technical committee, but we did write this down. 34 countries supported it, a position paper on how we would achieve exemplary levels of international consensus. And we set out some expectations around behaviors. And crucially, we set out a 5-step process for how we would try to work collectively to reach consensus. And the first step of that 5-step process was to say, we shouldn't be afraid if issues and disagreements are identified. That will happen. That is inevitable. We shouldn't shy away from them. We should recognize that will happen. And when that happens, we should be really honest and unlock them and understand them. The second step is to say that, very much in my experience, when I see different national delegations disagreeing on points, my experience is very strongly that they are almost never answering the same question differently. What's really going on is that they are answering different questions. That there are some underlying fundamentals of the approach that they bring to an issue based on different custom and practice, different educational background, different geotechnical world, different predominant ground conditions. These things come together to mean that there are different perspectives in place. So people are answering different questions and inevitably coming up with different answers. And unless you understand those perspectives, unless you are generous and you take time and you try and understand the different perspectives of different parties, you can't get to that consensus position. The third step is making sure that you take time to note the points of agreement and isolate the points of disagreement. So often what we find is that different delegations may agree on 80, 90, 95% of content and disagree on a relatively small proportion. If all you ever do is talk about the disagreements, then sometimes that sets a tone which is more challenging. If one recognizes beforehand the degree of consensus and alignment that there is, and isolate those points of disagreement, it can really change the tone for those positive discussions towards getting to a consensus position. And then we talk around that fourth step of saying, actually, there are only a finite number of options typically to deal with these things. There's normally a lot of utility in just writing down maybe a series of different clauses of different ways of approaching something and then taking a decision. And this has served us, this whole philosophy and this emphasis around achieving exemplary levels of consensus has really served us well. And under my chairmanship, and this was till about a month ago, I think I last counted these up. Under my chairmanship, there have been 440 formal decisions taken by TC250, where each of the 34 countries has had the opportunity to make a vote, and 432 of those were taken unanimously. So 98% of the decisions have been unanimous. And actually, of some of the 8 that weren't, some of those were what I would class as being like indicative votes, so they were never going to be unanimous. They were a stepping stone towards trying to get to a consensus position. But I think this, I'm certainly immensely proud of the degree of unanimity, the degree of consensus that we have been able to achieve so far. And then just building a little bit on the overall approach. So I showed you this previously. I just wanted to highlight particularly that step in 2012 when the specific mandate M515 was provided to SEN from the European Commission. And this mandate was a really important document. It set out high-level expectations, desires from the Commission that we agreed with as TC250, but it also unlocked the possibility of funding. And so we responded to this mandate, adopting a kind of strict programmatic approach, looking at everything we wanted to do, splitting it into a series of tasks, phasing it across 4 phases, and bringing that discipline that you have with the programmatic approach to something like this around clear vision and objectives, clear division of responsibilities. And we mapped all of this out, and this provided that top-down framework for the evolution project. But what we also did was we went through the process of systematic review. So we invited every country to provide comment on all of the existing Eurocodes. We received thousands of comments in response, and those have been those were incorporated within the evolution project. So we've got both, if you like, that strategic top-down perspective within Mandate M5.5 and that kind of bottom-up user experience that's coming through the systematic review comments, and we've combined those to define the activities for the evolution project. And what's happening, some cross-cutting themes that have been major emphasis around robustness, assessment, climate change. I'll come back and talk around these a little later. A big focus on ease of use, significant change across all of the existing Eurocodes, the year 1990 to 1999, and then that introduction of those 3 new documents on glass, fiber polymer composite, and membrane structures. And just a few headlines, just to give you a sense of the scale of this. I counted this up just recently. We currently have 129 active CEN TC 250 subcommittees, working groups, task groups, ad hoc groups. So you can just look at that at a European level. Inevitably that means that we have thousands of experts engaged at the European level. When you take account of the mirror committees, then you can probably multiply that tenfold, and it just gives you a sense of the scale of engagement in this. I mentioned the importance of alignment with other product and execution standards. We have 46 active liaisons with other CEN technical committees. We have 22 liaison and partner organizations, it's like those industry bodies who are tracking and engaging in our work. A lot of the drafting work was done by 76 international project teams, linked through 440 contracts. These were paid. There was an international competition for membership of these project teams. They were paid roles. We have provided not just the standard CEN opportunities for comment through inquiry and formal vote, but many others during the project team's work, all comments catalogued, responded to. We've got a complete audit trail for all of that work. And notwithstanding the challenges of working during the COVID period, all of the Mandate M5.5 work was delivered to budget, it was all delivered to programme, and all deliverables were accepted by the Commission with no queries. We've prepared complete audit trails, technical audit trails for all of the work that's been undertaken as well. So we've got that background to everything that's been done. And as I've said, thousands of experts engaged across Europe in this work. So where do we sit today? And I'll accelerate a little bit, so we're just getting kind of tight on time. Perhaps to a few bits of background I need to give first here. Probably some key things to note. I mean, essentially, broadly, the approach here has been there's been work done within project teams, that's in red. That work passed to the responsible subcommittee or working group, who then developed the standard through to a maturity suitable for the CEN formal inquiry process. Once we get those comments back through the formal inquiry process, there's then further work by the subcommittee or working group to finalise the standard. We then have the formal vote, and then after formal vote, then the standard is released to national standards bodies, and that kicks off the opportunity to finalise national annexes and develop supporting guidance. So those are the kind of principal building blocks. A couple of definitions that are important to be aware of. Is a term date of availability. So that's the date when the text of a standard is made available from CEN to national standards bodies. And then this really important date, the date of withdrawal, and that's the latest date by which national standards conflicting with an EN have to be withdrawn. And what we recognized was that the work that we were doing on the Eurocodes, because we had a phased approach to this, because we have got those 11 standards, those 64 parts, the 12 technical specifications, the 7 technical reports, we were not going to be able to release these in a single big bang. We were going to release them on a phased approach as they go through the inquiry and formal vote processes. But we wanted to have a consistent model that gave countries flexibility in terms of their implementation, but also provided a clear backstop date by which we expected there to be a transition from the first generation Eurocodes to the second generation Eurocodes. So we got a special derogation from the CEN Technical Board rules that enabled us to define, crucially, a common data withdrawal for all second generation Eurocodes. So essentially what we're doing is we're currently taking the documents through inquiry and formal vote. As soon as the formal vote is done, then subject to the final sort of tweaks and bit of work that CEN need to do, those documents are being made available to the national standards bodies as soon as we can. And so, as I'll show you in a minute, there's already documents being made available. What we've got is this backstop date, this date of withdrawal, March 2028. And the important thing to understand here is, although we call that the date of withdrawal for the second generation Eurocodes, what that date of withdrawal concerns is any conflicting standards. And obviously the standards conflicting with the second generation Eurocodes are the first generation Eurocodes. So sometimes this causes a little bit of confusion because we talk about it being the date of withdrawal for the second generation Eurocodes. Of course, it's a property of the second generation Eurocodes, but the documents it affects are the first generation Eurocodes. So what this is saying is that by March 2028, national standards bodies need to have withdrawn their first generation Eurocodes. It's akin to the March 2010 date that we had for the first generation Eurocodes. So this paints a kind of broader picture of, we have a very comprehensive publication plan and tracker across all the different Eurocode parts. This enables us to understand exactly where we sit. We have phase programs for when documents go to inquiry and formal vote, and where do we sit today. So of the second generation Eurocodes, I've said it contains those 11 standards, 64 parts, 12 technical specifications, 7 technical reports. 36 inquiries have been completed, 10 are currently live, 16 will happen in March. 21 ENs and TSs have completed their formal vote and being made available, and these are the ones that are made available, and then you'll see the balance we're working through so that we will have completed all of the formal votes by the end of 2025, so that all of the second generation Eurocodes will be made available to national standards bodies by early 2026, providing a 2-year window between that and that date of withdrawal of March 2028. So when Charles spoke earlier around a sort of 4-year, 5-year period, he's understanding this program, and I've been talking to him around this program and how this fits together. So where are we with UK implementation? So in terms of UK implementation, BSI, on the advice of the relevant committees, BSI committees, B525 and 526 principally, are publishing the second generation Eurocodes as soon as they are available. Now, they don't need to do this, but it feels like the right thing to do. Better to put these second generation Eurocodes into the public domain so that people can use them where appropriate, but certainly what they can do is they can familiarize themselves and they can start to prepare for the transition to the second generation Eurocodes. And that's important, particularly for, say, software suppliers, people who want to write guides and other books. Good to get these documents into the public domain as soon as they're available, and national annexes are being developed and will be published subsequently. But of course, what this means is that we're potentially causing a degree of confusion within the market, because what we have is a period of coexistence when both the first generation and the second generation Eurocodes are both available. And so what we have done, and if you're going to remember one thing from what I've said today, this is probably the most important thing, that the national forward explains the status. Okay, so the national forward explains what's happening, that it explains the date of withdrawal. These are sort of selected paragraphs, so it explains why the document's being published in the first paragraph on the screen. It explains when the first generation Eurocodes will be withdrawn. Importantly, it goes on to explain that until that date, the first generation documents should be considered as the applicable standards for building and civil engineering works constructed in the UK, unless otherwise specified by the relevant authority in the specification of a particular project. So there shouldn't be any ambiguity for designers on which are the sort of default applicable standards. But then that third paragraph is really important, because it says that essentially, it is not precluded to use the second generation Eurocodes. It's not precluded to do, but it does need to be done carefully if you're going to mix standards. And essentially, the onus is placed on the user to satisfy themselves that they're not going to, that whatever they do isn't going to result in a lower level of safety than we have with the first generation Eurocodes and associated national annexes. I am sure that there will be situations where it will make absolute sense to use material from the second generation Eurocodes, particularly because their scope is extended beyond the first generation Eurocodes. And so there really isn't any conflict, and provided users are comfortable that there is compatibility between the second generation content and the rest of the first generation content, then I think there could be a lot of value in doing that. And what I'm very hopeful of is that some of the industry bodies will be helpful in guiding users around where some of the most useful content might be. But there is a little bit, a thing that I did want to flag, and Anton and I have talked to this, and I know BSI are looking at this. We've created, you know, this thing around having a coexistence period is not normal. And so what that means is that if you look at BS Online, for example, you can see that the 2023 version of EN 1990, which you know is therefore a second generation document, is listed as current. But as I've outlined, the National Forward explains that it's not really to be used on projects until March 2028, except for particular circumstances. And the first generation document, as referenced on the bottom of the screen, is shown as current and superseded, but it does remain in use. So there is a risk of a little bit of confusion here, and I know this is something the BSI are looking into, and many of us are looking to communicate this point so that that confusion is addressed. And as I said, the National Forward explains this all. So then some key changes, and I'm not going to go through this in loads of detail. I'm just going to spin through a few highlights. So EN 1990 basis of design is changing, being extended to cover both basis of design, but also basis of assessment and retrofit of existing structures. A really important change there. On EN 1991, we have new parts covering atmospheric icing and waves of currents, and also coverage around climate change. 1992, I'll show you a couple of things on in a minute. You know, 1993, a new part on use of numerical methods, which kind of is an exemplar of how we're looking to make sure that new technologies and approaches are available and can be used to drive the efficiency of the way structures are designed. In 1997, geotechnical design has been split into 3 parts. And the second part, reformulated, so rather than covering methods for ground investigation, it's been reiterated to say, you know, if there are parameters that you want, it kind of works from a parameter perspective. If you want this parameter, here are the tests you could use to do it. So much more user-centric, actually, a really important step forward. I'm very conscious that we're a little short on time. I had a few examples here around what's happening with EN 1992, and some of these are nice exemplars of what we've done elsewhere as well. Putting the core material, the principal material that be used by designers in the core text, additional things in annexes, some integration across parts, so reducing the number of parts that are required. I will just kind of whiz through this, because what I really wanted to say was that if you are interested in more detail, one of the big thrusts across DC250 at the moment is around communication. It's a major focus for me. JRC, the European Commission's Joint Research Centre, are working really closely with us around the communication. So if you want more details, just Google JRC and Eurocodes to get to the Eurocodes pages. And we're already producing a number of materials that explain detail around you know, what's happening for technical changes in all the different Eurocode parts. There are presentations that are available from a recent conference we had in Germany. Everything is available to see online. So it's a series of presentations. And then what's also happening is we will shortly in the new year be releasing a series of 10 videos that provides a little bit more detail on all the things that I've talked to you today around the evolution of the Eurocodes, the background, the approach we've taken. And in due course, we're going to augment those with further details in terms of technical background. And then I very much hope that we'll be able to put on a sort of fairly substantial event in a few years' time to provide really detailed technical explanation of the differences between different sections from generation 1 to generation 2. So, and with that, let me pause. I've kind of accelerated a little bit at the end, but hopefully people will be comfortable that there's good places to go for further information, and I really hope that's been useful.
No, that's been brilliant. Well, similar to all that you do in and around TC250 with your teams, extremely thorough, unbelievably insightful, and the journey has been going a long time for yourself and your team for quite some while. But just understanding that this is coming and some of this content has arrived is really important. I am really mindful of the time, but I've got to ask you one question. I was looking, because I get people's names. So you were listening to what Charles had to say, and you did touch upon it. Charles is our regulator, who does look after approved document A for England. So given the timings and March 2028, would you envisage, therefore, that we should have inclusion of the Gen 2 Eurocodes citation in revised approved document A and the other documents around the UK around that date? Is that what you would be looking for?
That's what I would be expecting. That's what I would be expecting. I'm certainly anticipating on the infrastructure side that the major infrastructure clients who tend to, who are able to kind of drive this change through contract.
Yes.
And their standards, I'm anticipating that they will have a cut across Gen 1 to Gen 2 around that time for new projects. And I'm anticipating that up until that time, the whole processes around departures from standards will likely be used as a means by which provisions from the second generation Eurocodes might be used where they bring particular benefit. Obviously, on the building side, it's obviously somewhat different, but it would certainly seem entirely sensible to me, and I think it's what's in Charles's mind is that date of March 2028 is a very sensible reference date, and it's the one that we should have in our minds, and it would certainly seem sensible to have things in place for that March 2028 date.
I mean, obviously, given my background as well, very mindful and respectful that we do have a functional system of building regulations in England, and therefore the point you raise about where it can be proven, it's discussed with client, maybe you can use these things earlier, but that's something that I suggest that additional guidance would be of benefit, and we'd look to the professional institutions and similar for that. Yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. Right, I am really mindful. I have got more questions, but we're going to have to draw a line there. We'll speak loads more. We'll have a dedicated session on Gen 2 going forward. Of that, I promise. But in the meantime, thank you. Thank you for all that you do. And I know Tracy's watching as well. Tracy, who provides a horrible term, secretariat, and supports TC250 and Steve and the team. You do an amazing job. And I think when this is finally done, I think if you can write an ISO standard on achieving consensus, I think that would be really good too. Yeah. So thank you. Right.
Thank you.
No, not at all. Thank you, Steve. That brings us to a close. I hope you have found today really insightful and useful. We've had 4 great speakers, and they've kindly given our time. And there remains a lot going on in our industry. And so, as I say, please give feedback in terms of how you found today, but also feedback more broadly in terms of what else you would like us to present upon. We are very lucky. We have access to literally thousands of committee experts and industry experts who are keen to come forward. So if you can think of things that you want to hear about, then please do let us know. I think on that basis, then, all that leaves me to say is thank you. Thank you to you for taking the time to join us. I know you're very busy, and I know there's been 4 sessions over the last 2 days, but we do this for you. As a national standards body, we can't function without yourselves, so thank you for your time. Of course, a huge thank you to all of my speakers today, but all of the speakers over the last 2 days that have spoken on the Built Environment Summit for us. And finally, a big shout out to our events team at BSI. This is hard to undertake, and with 4 sections running over the last 2 days, they've done a sterling job. So other than that, and I can't believe I'm going to say it, but it is the 7th of December. Enjoy the festive break coming up. Look forward to seeing you in 2024. And keep an eye on our website. We've got lots of events upcoming, and we actually start on the 30th of January in earnest, when we'll undertake a bit of a review for 2023 from a BSI and standards perspective, and set out what will be coming forward in 2024 in terms of standards, content and support to the marketplace. Have a great evening and see you again soon. Bye for now.